Welcome to Astrology for Business Evolution 2019. So excited to connect, and let's take a deep breath before we dive in, as we're going to be doing that momentarily. Very excited to connect and reconnect, perhaps for some of you connecting in for the first time, talking and perhaps in this more practical way for you, maybe compare it to what you are used to in your astrological education before, whether you have been self-taught, whether you have already been using and practicing astrology for some time, integrating it with other modalities, and or whether you have started more recently and really decided at this point or realized you are ready for the next step and really applying this really wisdom and the wealth of wisdom and information in a practical way in your business, and in particular in your marketing. But we're going to be touching on other areas of business such as sales as well, and we're going to learn how it is very much connected to marketing, of course, as well as towards the end, as well as how really what you do in your marketing and sales, how it needs to also be connected to your daily habits, and then tools to scale, and also knowing when you're ready to do that and or pivot in your business. Now we're going to be expanding a lot more on that, especially the last part that I mentioned in the next level, which will be more advanced astrology for business. I know for many of you or several of you, this may be the first time that you're introduced to these concepts. And so it is intended to be a really more, again, a practical and applied from a business astrological perspective, application of astrology. So for an ambitious beginner to an intermediate, and I know that even for advanced astrologers, this serves as a great refresher. I keep updating material as well, but it really is something that we need to apply on a regular basis and also see how it works in our business and working also with our clients, because it's continually we're getting more out of that. Okay, so with all of that said, huge really excitement here and big hugs before we get started, and let's dive in. So let's share my screen here first of all, and here we go. Okay, so welcome once again to Astrology for Business Evolution 2019, and this is your class number 1 on Astrology of Wholeness 101. Okay, so the intention for today will be to give you a review and a recap of what I feel and what I had gathered in my experience with teaching and practicing astrology and sharing it for a number of years now, in particular in this format and similar formats, what you need to know, really what really will serve you to have a strong fundamentals of before we dive in further. Okay, but there will be an opportunity throughout the course to reassess and say, okay, I could use a little bit of regrouping in this particular, maybe learning more about a particular area. So anyway, let's get started here. What we're going to cover in the next 10 weeks is starting with Astrology of Wholeness and Essential Energetic Partnerships. We're going to introduce that concept today. For some of you, it may be introduction. For others, this may be already what you have studied with me in the past, for example, in the intermediate level astrology, such as intermediate astrology for integrated healing work. Also in some cosmic cycles classes. And so I've gathered, especially for the integrated healing work, intermediate level class, just so in case you're wondering, depending on what you have studied with me in the past, if you have, it's an amalgamation of about 2 or 3 of those classes. I'll mention when we get to that. The actual classes from the course, okay, because they really have proven to be very, very helpful foundation for what we're going to be studying. And then we're going to really, before we dive in and really turn our perspective a little bit, pivot from this wholeness and healing oriented, and really wholeness would be the perspective that I would call that primarily, to really, and then I'm going to talk about that in a moment, what I actually mean by that. And then we're going to turn to some specific keys starting today, and then especially next time, and so on what is really helpful for you to know and where to focus in to get clarity on your highly magnetic signature style, why this will be very helpful for you in your social media presence, but really overall marketing, core values and monetizable gifts. So why, once again, so that you can really get clear on your aligned money channels when you're creating offers and really beyond. Then we're going to talk about your ideal client, community, and soul group. And once again, very important, right, from client attraction perspective and positioning yourself, knowing who you're here to serve so that your marketing can reflect that, even when you're looking to shift and pivot periodically, as we all do. And right, as we grow and as our business grows and it, you know, enters different phases, or as we're adding new businesses and new income streams and new interests into what we're doing as well. So then towards class 5, we're going to talk about your magnetic marketing language map. So really putting all the pieces of the puzzle together to help you now to see how you can build what I refer to as your message credibility, or achieve that highest coherence or higher coherence, and just really having a sense that you are communicating what you want to be communicating, that you're feeling as understood as you can feel, right, and choose that for yourself, to be clear, consistent, and relevant in your marketing and in your soul-aligned and compelling marketing messaging, okay? That's the biggest thing, and really purpose and mission for me that really led to the creation of this course, to help you really to be, once again, relevant in your marketing and all of that comes with that. So, which is obviously fundamental for not just positioning yourself, but really growing your business and being more impactful and so on, fulfilling your mission and your purpose. So, towards the end of the course, we're going to talk about creating your quarterly marketing plan in fairly specific terms, obviously with you having also flexibility within that, because it's going to be your plan. But really helping you to know what are the certain engagement keys, and really knowing, you know, where to focus in, you know, where to focus in primarily based on your cosmic design, primarily, but also obviously based on your experience and what you know has worked so far and what hasn't, what's calling you to explore next, and then also really what to let go of as well. And then at the very end, in the culmination of the course, we're going to talk about how to emerge really as a leading voice in your niche, which includes now having a whole lot more clarity on knowing yourself, and then speaking with confidence and credibility as an expert, authority, content creator, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and then there was that bonus that I referred to in the description of the course, which is also part of that last class video on creating daily deliberate habits for success. Okay. Okay, so with that said, let's get started. So what we're going to cover today is that number 1, right, the astrology of wholeness. And we're going to start talking about the essential energetic partnerships that I've been obsessed teaching about in the past at least a couple of years, and increasingly so, so much so that that's pretty much, I would say, most of what I live and breathe and teach and practice. And likely when you get to work with me one-on-one is what I'm continually bringing you back. Maybe not in so many always words, depending on, you know, who I'm working with. If I'm working with an astrology student and a practitioner, then obviously astrological lingo is part of that, because I know it helps you to know where I'm seeing things that I'm seeing. But with other people, right, it's just really knowing. And this is why I also am so passionate about teaching this. Is not just to help you from your own wholeness perspective, but it really, you know, as a Virgo rising here, to me, the effectiveness of what I'm teaching is important, so that and not just from one perspective, but ideally from at least two or three, meaning it's going to help you to be more coherent energetically, also from a marketing perspective, from your positioning as well. And then also importantly, when you venture in, and the chances are most of you will, at some point or other, are intrigued and to help other people in this particular way, which you will be able to, especially as we, if you decide to join us for the advanced course and then a practitioner training as well later on, right, which obviously is optional. You will learn also how you can use this information to help others. So we're getting started. What is a natal chart and your cosmic design? I'm just going to quickly recap on that. I'm not going to be spending really a lot of time on this because this is an intermediate course. I'm already presuming that you have at least an understanding of how to print your chart. But I will touch on that. I will actually do that as well in case you do need that instruction if you haven't used astro.com before. Easy ways to read cusps and signs, and then the core energetic integrity keys and the introduction to the essential energetic partnerships that must be integrated in your cosmic design, in your life really, for increasing vitality and overall integrity of your energetic container, and especially in the age that we are in. And I'm referring to the era, to the years, right? The course has been created in 2019, almost on the cusp of 2020. So I know that you know what I'm talking about when I say that. Very, very important, right? Really a time of big, big changes. So if you studied with me in the past, you at this point are used to me typically sharing at least one image. There is usually more text than images for sure. But I like to just remind us that really what we're talking about, what we're connecting here archetypally with, are planets. Obviously, they're in the sky. They have their own consciousness. They have their own intelligence, but they also represent archetypally and symbolically aspects in our own psyche, right? As above, so below, meaning in our own body, in our own system, in our own world as well. And it also just gives you a little bit of a visual of, let's say, a comparison here to see this giant Jupiter, the giant, as I like to refer to it. I mean, it's still compared to the sun. Nothing is comparable in terms of the size, right? And as we're going to see, the importance of the sun as well. And then, compared to, for example, a Neptune, and then Saturn compared to Uranus. And we're going to see why that's important. For most of you likely are familiar, right? Because some of these planets they rule two signs, traditionally speaking. And then we've got Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars here. So, I just realized that actually the moon is not, it's not listed. So I'm going to explore here a different image next time in terms of there are some dwarf planets, but our moon is not listed. Anyway, point taken. Let's move on here. So just a couple of slides that I'm going to include in this class, maybe another one, the next one, just so that you have a reminder in case you're still learning the symbols, which is okay, by the way. This is not about memorizing or having to be, very basically, specific in remembering all of the little details that are needed in interpreting a lot of this. This is why I love teaching astrology also from an energetic perspective, and then also intuitive perspective. For some of you, if you've taken Introduction to Intuitive Astrology, I talked more about that there as well, right? Because there is the logical part that we use, right? We use our left brain, but also very importantly to use the right brain also when we are working with understanding a chart, whether it's our own or else somebody else's. Just a quick thing here that I like always to mention is reminder that here we've had the sign symbols, right? The 12 symbols here from Aries to Pisces. And then on the right-hand side are the planets that actually rule each sign. And now the difference maybe to some of the modern Western astrology schools that you may have studied with or self-studied is that I do subscribe to using actually traditional rulerships primarily, and then I add on modern rulerships for additional layer of information for the reasons that I'm going to share towards the end today. Not critical for you to know, even though I like to highlight it. Typically, we're actually, today's class is probably going to be a little bit more, well, definitely a lot of content, even compared to what we're going to be, where it's actually going to lighten up, and I'm going to make it, even at an intermediate level, I'm going to make it fairly simple, and so that you can really, you're not going to need to be like a perfect at, I don't know, aspects and even fully on understanding the archetypes. Like after 30 years of studying astrology and then many years in practicing and even teaching, I am still at 3 decades later, constantly receiving new information and having new awareness in terms of working with archetypes and really their higher expression and more effective expression, so on and so forth, okay? So we got the nodes here, the Chiron and the Black Moon Lilith, which we're not going to talk about Black Moon Lilith, but obviously you're more than welcome to, I know that some of you are interested in studying that. There's just a lot more other elements as well, but Chiron we'll touch on, and the nodes definitely, and then the planets. And here what I was referring to, the modern rulers in modern astrology, typically it's Uranus, that's discussed as or seen as the ruler of Aquarius, Neptune as the ruler of Pisces, and Pluto as ruler of Scorpio. However, I do suggest to use Saturn, as you're going to see in the slide before, as the ruler of Aquarius, Jupiter as the ruler of Pisces, and you've seen that comparison in size, right? And then Mars actually as a ruler of Scorpio, and you can see that once here, right? So Mars rules Scorpio, Saturn rules Aquarius, both Aquarius and Capricorn, and Jupiter rules both Pisces and Sagittarius, okay, primarily. And then a co-ruler, right? These 3 co-rulers. And these are symbols here for the planetary aspects, which we're going to touch on. But as you're going to see in this course, I'm really still going to highlight the importance of knowing the fundamentals and how much really you still are going to be able to get, even without needing to go into, the planetary aspects into a great length, or even, asteroids and many other things that are great once you are at advanced level and looking for maybe additional layers of understanding things, okay, as you're guided. We have part of fortune and retrograde here, sign as well, and the sign for degree. So with that said, wholeness. What is wholeness? So Wikipedia tells us it's the state of forming a complete and harmonious whole or unity. And number 2, the state of being unbroken or undamaged. Well, of course. So that's what I wanted just to remind us of. And I do have some that I've shared in the past, especially in, as I mentioned, in the integrated healing work course that we talked about. And really, you already have an idea if you have studied with me. So I talk about this, but I'm just starting to really outline this a little bit more, just so that you really have an understanding of what am I talking about here. And so this, yes, a lot of this comes from this Virgo Pisces polarity, right? That is the primary polarity that I'm operating with. And we're going to learn, especially in the next class video, what is your primary really operating reality, if you like, based on your ascendant and descendant. So, and we're going to learn, if you haven't, right, why wholeness is connected, or why I connect wholeness with Virgo, but also Pisces, just from a different perspective. So what am I talking about? Now I can literally, and I will likely have a course just in astrology of wholeness, because anytime I do this, I always realize it's just even 2 hours is not enough to, put some of the basics together. But without getting into the details that I'm just going to touch here on what I'm referring to. So what is, from this perspective, in this astrological conversation and learning, it considers the totality of human beings. That's primarily what I'm referring to, right? And the elements are going to help us to see that, right? So emotional, physical, spiritual, and mental body. So again, astrological elements really help us to see that, right? The water, earth, and fire and air. So Now, there's a little bit of, so when we talk about emotional, spiritual, actual, astrologically, it both is represented by water, but there is the fire element that is more like the spirit body is actually ruled, like the etheric body, and the life force itself is represented. And we were not going to get carried away with that. So we also that we can see the polarities as the unifying interconnected forces in the universe. What I'm referring to are those 6 polarities. We have 12 signs, but just getting stuck, if you like, on, and just talk about the signs, I find is just a key thing that I see missing in a lot of the astrology that I know I've been blessed to study, and I wish to see more of it. I said, instead of waiting, right, to see more people talking about it, then why, right? That this is why I've decided to, have been strongly guided, especially at this time, to bring that in. I literally see it as a part of the solution to a lot of the things that are when we really implement this in our lives, in our business. And it really allows us to explain a lot of them, you could say, the symptoms, and even deeper than the symptoms of some of the really global issues that we're experiencing in the world. Because the wholeness starts here, right? If we're looking to create that in the world, if we're looking to create that healing, that harmony, it needs to start somewhere. And so we're referring to different dimensions of the psyche that are represented by 10 planets as representation of where more conscious awareness is needed, rather, right? So you will oftentimes hear me talk about this when I am also saying, I'm going to share in a moment also some principles that I'm going to suggest, like 5, 6 principles to really refer to someone when I'm talking about astrology of wholeness, that's sort of a signal to you, if you like, what are we looking at, right? So we're always looking at sun and the moon together, Venus and Mars, and right, the ascendant and descendant, rather than getting too overly attached to one part of our chart, unless in some cases when that is actually suggested. If you have several planets in one part of the chart, that is actually what is suggested. But even in those cases, meaning there's a lot of learning for you in that particular area. Like if you have 3 planets in a 10th or the 1st, right? That's where your personal business development, right? Part of your life and your path needs to be focused in. But even in those cases that we are still aware that we don't get overly attached. And we will know when that is happening. So that, right, we have these different representations where actually more awareness is needed, rather than an invitation to pass personal judgment. So when you see somebody Saturn in the 10th or Mars in the 7th, oh, that must mean, no, that's not what we're talking about, at least not in my astrology school. When we're talking about any of the planets, and whether it's retrograde, whether it is, as I like to refer to it, contrarian, meaning it's in a sign that's opposite of what it rules. For example, Moon in Capricorn, Saturn in Cancer, right? Venus in Aries, so on and so forth, which we're going to touch on here. So we're going to talk more about that in the advanced class, because there's just so much more that we need to cover here, that we don't pass judgment. There is a reason that soul, and that soul may be you, right, was born with Venus in Aries, that soul was born with Venus in Scorpio, just as others are born with Venus in Libra, but not many people. In fact, most people are not going to be born with the planet exactly in the sign that it rules. So it all has a very specific, helpful meaning for the integration of really achieving that wholeness on an individual level, but it's also helpful in relationships and beyond, really. So Astrology of Wholeness recognizes and helps us to bridge the awareness and growth gaps, as I like to refer to them. So I'm not looking for problems. I'm looking for, if anything, right, if we are, because we as human beings, we still do need to make a judgment in some cases, because clients expect that from us. Even in our own case, sometimes we just need to make a decision and we refer to our chart. I like to refer to it as, even if there's a problem we're experiencing or something we're looking to solve or something just doesn't fit, as an awareness gap or growth gap. Okay, so it's a gap not necessarily a problem, right? Sometimes our left brain can see it as a problem, but it's, as you know, the chances are, if you're a healer, astrologer, coach, you know that there is always an opportunity for growth with every so-called problem. So awareness growth gaps towards a fuller body, mind, spirit integration and achievement of one's harmonized well-being gradually, right? It's gradual process, year by year, day by day, lifetime by lifetime, and more consciously so. Astrology of Wholeness relies on empowering language. I could have a whole course on this, but I already bring that, right? This is a big part of why I'm also teaching Astrology for Business. So we're going to talk about this especially in the class 2 and 3 in this course, that is helpful for the client and provides an active way to work with the information and awareness, rather than just, oh, is that my destiny? Oh, that's, I'm a stubborn Taurus and that's it, right? No, what am I? Who am I becoming? How can that information help me to become a better version of who I'm meant to become? And by the way, we're going to talk even more about this in advanced astrology for business and then in special practitioner training when we focus in more on working with clients. Okay, so while upgrading any archaic language that no longer serves, okay, I have North Node in the 3rd and Neptune in the 3rd in Sagittarius. So this is a big part of opposite my Mercury, and I have Virgo rising ruled obviously by Mercury. So Mercury is a ruler of my chart. So the communication is what I'm saying. Component is huge for me to help bring some really recalibration around, okay? So, and seeing really things in a different way, in a way that's going to serve us more in this new age, if you'd like to refer to it that way. Engages both the left and the right brain capacity in the learning and sharing process. Now, I know that, for us in the intuitive healing coaching world, it's like, well, of course, Milada, we would, engage both the left and right brain capacity, but you would be surprised, if not even more, the right brain, right? But you would be surprised, because I've been blessed to also be trained in a very traditional, very left brain oriented, very precision oriented. And so that's part of what I bring also to this. Although there are courses that I haven't, that I'm teaching. It's a part of a diploma program here in Canada, and I occasionally have students internationally joining in, but it's primarily for our Canadian, it's called Canadian Association for Astrological Education Program. It's an intellectual course. It's just so detailed and so precision oriented that it tends to attract astrologers, and really from ancient times that were very yes and no oriented, very good, bad, right? Benefic, malefic. And this is some of the language that I'm talking about, to where even today's world, a lot of traditional astrologers will not necessarily engage. They don't believe that intuition, or not sure, or how they will. Maybe I don't believe that people don't use it. To me, it's difficult to believe that. But they will not admit it in most cases. They'll say, oh, you gotta apply your logic, right? So that's what I'm talking about. I'm really looking here for, if there are, because this is also me on some level, or was really looking also for really ways to integrate, because we do need logic, but we very much also need, because if we stay also completely in just the the fairy tale kind of the conversation about being overly idealistic from an astrological perspective, that can also, right, we need to face the shadow expression of that, meaning we do need to, clients do expect us to provide practical information. Anyway, more fuller expression oriented. So I'm always looking, right? So it's not like, oh, judgment always is good or bad. I mean, God forbid, right? It really is, what is this part like? What, if anything, in the chart, and especially in a conversation with a client, with you, right? Whether when you're asking questions in a group or one-on-one, is asking to be more fully expressed. So it's an effective expression of a principle or an archetype, and then harmonizing that, right, with different other elements specific to the purpose that we are looking for to accomplish, or goal to accomplish. And then, so it's less descriptive of the given characteristics as destined. Oh, you're stubborn Taurus, you're active, or, not even to go into, different ways that people refer, like to an Aries or Gemini, you know what I mean? Like some of those myths that are just not that they're unhelpful, but, they can also be harmful in some ways, because then people really get also wrong idea about astrology, right? Like it's not intended, definitely not from the ancient times, to be for entertainment purposes. It really is a whole lot more than that. So, and it's not static as well, right? So we know that. So it recognizes and honors inherent paradoxes in a natal chart and consults the client on how they're being reconciled in real life, at least from my perspective, how I teach that and practice, and offer solutions where support is asked and welcomed, right? That's very, very key. And we'll talk more about that in the advanced and class, and then practitioner training in terms of the consulting processes, skills, and so on and so forth, ethics, and so on. Okay, so let's move on here. So the core principles that I wanted you to keep in mind. So now this was a little bit of, I know it's a little bit more like of an outline just to introduce you to that idea. If you haven't studied with me in the past or have seen it outlined in this way in my more courses from maybe before, then recent, and then really, but again, from a more even a specific perspective, what are we here referring to, like what to keep in mind? So some of the core principles that I always keep in mind, even remind myself on a daily basis, and I consider that guidedness, basically like my guides and my inner being reminding me. So what am I talking about? Number one, that we will study and integrate the solar and lunar principle together. So let's not get stuck in, oh, my sun, my sun, my sun, or my moon, my moon, my moon, right? Like you're going to see a lot of astrologers that are more lunar based, especially healers tend to be very lunar based, right? The new moon, the full moon, the lunar goddess, the lunar this, the lunar that, right? The receiving, relax. So let's just let stuff go. Let's just, focus on the healing crisis over, after healing crisis, and not enough focus on the solar principles, which are about creating the experiences, making the effort that we actually, so creating the experiences we need for our own growth, right? So they're opposite, they're polarities, but also why it's important to study them together, okay? This is also about obviously Venus and Mars, right? Jupiter and Saturn, for example. And, there are other polarities. There are many polarities that we can look at, but the solar and the lunar is fundamental, and that's what we're going to start with today. And so again, why are we doing that, Milada? Well, wholeness, right? It's easier to learn as well, easier to integrate, easier to interpret, and then it actually is easier for you to share that as well. When you can see both, it just also gives you the two elements. And I've got that here, number 3, right? We can blend 2-3 astro elements at a time. It allows us, astrology of wholeness perspective allows us to do that. So rather than, because oftentimes I'll get questions at an advanced or practitioner level, Milada, where do I start? So how do you read the chart? How do you know what you know? Well, this actually allows it to do that. So if we say the first principle is integrate the solar and lunar principle, that already gives you 2 elements at least, and even more if you consider the houses, right? The houses and the signs, not to mention the aspects, but even just the signs of your sun and the moon, okay? It already gives you 2 fundamental elements to blend. And I've got here, and no, we do not need to consider the whole chart. Anybody who is telling you that, oh, you have to consider the whole chart or else, you're not reading it properly. Let that stuff go. Whoever is telling you that, fill in the blanks, okay? Because in order to get helpful insight from a chart, that is a myth, okay? Anybody who really, especially those who have done this, and I don't mean just studied it, but actually worked with clients, will tell you that the more we do this, the simpler we actually want to teach it, and the simpler we are guided to do that, okay? So Number 2 that I've skipped here, we will consider the axis of polarity. So it's sort of connected with the number 1 of expression. What I'm referring to, there are signs, houses. So the core relationship axis, as I refer to the 1st and the 7th, from a house perspective, and we'll learn about the houses today or recap on that. The Aries Libra axis, right, is the first one, but really we have 6 of them, and how they can be best integrated and harmonized in a fuller expression. That's always what I'm looking for. Even, you know, we can talk about your Aries rising or your Leo rising or your Aquarius rising, but we at some point, sooner than later, once you have some basic understanding of your ascendant, you've got to, I suggest, look at it from a wholeness perspective, because otherwise you're going to be missing an important part of that perspective and wondering, why do I keep going from one extreme to the other? Okay. Number 4, we can experience elements as energetic medicine or energetic vitamins or nutrients, if you'd like. I'll touch on that a little bit more today, but we'll talk more about that throughout the course. And number 5, we shall not judge what we see in one's or your own, right? Own design, your cosmic design, human design. And I'm not referring actually to the human design modality here. I'm referring to also when, you know, you've got the cosmic, like you've got the astrological chart in front of you when you're reading for somebody, or yourself, by the way. You're a very important part of that equation. And then you also have a person, obviously a client, an actual client, right? That's either, if you're right consulting in video or in audio, is right there. So whether it's something that the client says or how they respond to what you're sharing and so on and so forth, right? I'm always going back to, you know, what are we hearing? You know, what are we knowing intuitively? Obviously, what specifically is being shared as a feedback to us, and then also going back to the chart. What is asking here to be expressed more? Hopefully this is making sense. If not, let me know. So what I've got here, so what I'm referring to in terms of not judging, but just trusting it, that the atypical and contrarian elements in one's chart do not need to be fixed. What I'm referring to, you know, how people will say, oh, you have a retrograde Mercury, therefore, yeah, this is what I read, or this is what or you have, you know, Saturn in Cancer, Venus in Aries, so, oh, that must mean, no, they don't, that doesn't need to be fixed, right? But instead, given permission to operate at their full potential, especially at that level of being that's represented by that planet, whether it's intellectual, whether it's in a relationship, to whatever the sign indicates or the house that that planet is in. So they can be more effective and harmoniously integrated with the rest of the chart in one's psyche, and then in one's daily life and habits, such as a retrograde planet, such as a square or an opposition, such as planet that's opposite, in a sign opposite of its natural rulership. Okay? Hope that makes sense. I'm just going to touch a little bit here on, obviously the concept of wholeness is ancient, okay? And there is an alchemical perspective, metaphysical perspective, right? There are many perspectives here that, so the Urborg wholeness with the mother as well, and the primordial connection with our innermost being here, and the transcendence of the separate self-sense here from Jung's perspective, and obviously like that umbilical effect, you know, for us, let's say in this human body, one of the earliest experiences of that in this lifetime would have been obviously in the womb experience is one of those experiences that actually energetically and archetypally and really as a memory, it's obviously retained in our memory as that connection that likely in many ways reminds us of how we feel, you know, before we're embodied again, when we are one with source, with spirit. So the Ouroboros, right, is a mythical image of a circular snake or dragon, as it's referred to, with its tail and its mouth. So this is just, you've Likely you're very familiar with that. We've talked about this before in other classes, special astrology for healers, astrology and healing, and so on. So I want to just remind you, right? So this concept obviously has been with us. It's in our DNA. It's everywhere. Present, it's in nature, and also importantly, what I'm going to be bringing is this how here, and I'm going to touch on that today, how that concept has very much been present and important to understand our relationship with that. Again, from both sun and the moon, but from lunar perspective as well, as a representation of our relationship with our archetypal mother, and then also our archetypal inner child, and then also the relationship with the biological parent, the nurturing parent, and then our biological inner child, and then, right, you can even go into the actual biological children too, right, through the lunar symbolism. Okay, so anyway, I could spend a lot more on that, but there is a little bit more here you can read on. Right from the alchemical studies from Jung's work. And that's the image of Ouroboros. And then a little bit more here, this part I want to just highlight. The Ouroboros is a dramatic symbol for the integration and the assimilation of the opposite of the shadow. So I like this perspective, right? So it's the feed back. I love that there is the hyphen, right? The feed is the like representing, right, the mouth, you could say, the entry point, right, and the back obviously is the back. So this feedback process is at the same time a symbol of immortality, since it is said of the Ouroboros that he slays himself and brings himself to life, fertilizes himself and gives birth to himself. He symbolizes the one who proceeds from the clash of opposites, and he therefore constitutes the secret of the prima materia, which unquestionably stems from man's unconscious, right? So basically here, it kind of really goes back to our relationship with ourself, you could say. I mean, there are many ways that we can express this, and our own transformation as well. And then again, I like to bring it to that concept once again of wholeness. To me, that really is what that comes back to, right? The sun and the moon. Now, after we've looked at those, some of the basic principles, as I like to teach them, and then, right, Venus and Mars as well together. It's helpful to look at it that way. Once again, it helps you to just be able to know, where you're looking at a chart. And this is what I'm going to highlight today. One of the biggest things will be, so when you look at the chart, to quickly right away focus in on, well, first of all, the design, which I'm going to share in a moment, and then see if anything is calling you visually, intuitively in terms of the design. There could be a focus in a particular sector of the chart. There could be a particular geometry. And then quickly after that, or if you like, as quickly as you're guided, sun, moon, and the ascendant. Okay, so you could say, like, it's almost like when you now employ the logic once you've had that sort of intuitive, like, oh, look at that geometry, right? So what is a natal chart? It's a map of the sky for the moment of one's birth, a map of our psyche, but please keep in mind it's a map, right? It's a map. It's a two-dimensional map. It's not, while for us astrologers that are obsessed with astrology, right, and similar tools, it just represents a lot, and it really does. It really is an amazing tool, like even so much so that I know, at least for me, it really is an access key to receiving phenomenal wisdom that is in service really to the client, and then obviously when I'm reading for myself, right, to me too. But it is a map, it is a chart, right? Just as a map of New York is just a map. I mean, it's super valuable because it's going to help you to get to the real place, but the real New York, right? The real Los Angeles, the real Toronto, or whatever that may be that you're going to or living at, is a whole lot more. So it's similar. So I actually, when I refer to the cosmic design, right? So there's a natal chart to me, well, it still is more than a map, is how I experience it. But then the cosmic design is actually how I experience the natal chart now, literally like lifts from the 2D perspective into like more like a hologram, you could say, of really your potential, and like a geometry that actually is connected with a map. That's to me. And then how you also interact with it in communion with that as well. So there is a map. There is something that I refer to as the cosmic design, which to me is it's the map or the natal chart, but it's actually more than that. And so just so much we can read right from a chart, but it really how we relate to different aspects of self, I would say, is really that from Astrology of Wholeness is fundamental, and integrating different levels of energy and polarities and so on. How to print your natal chart at this point, right? If you're like, Milada, where do I start? Just in case you haven't done that before, astro.com, free horoscopes, and then you can either go to natal chart. In my introductory courses, I usually will have a few more slides on how to do that. Here, I figure you're already familiar. And then you get, or I do suggest to get to extended chart selection under free horoscopes, and then enter your information. And then here, choose natal chart. I personally like natal chart with transits, but if that's confusing at this point, if you're not familiar what transits are, then just choose natal chart wheel and leave the web default style, and then click here to show chart. Okay. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what I'm referring to, the cosmic design, which once again, at a two-dimensional level is your natal chart. But at this, the first time you're looking at a chart, what I'm also here suggesting is to tune in your intuitive senses, right? So I'm definitely not an astrologer that's just going to say, don't, God forbid, just don't use your intuition. Absolutely, right? Use your knowing. Now, I know that the definition of intuition is going to be, different in different ways. Really, you're tuning, first of all, in your own intuition, in your own just a sense of, even where to focus in. And so to me, really, what I'm actually saying here is to use what I like to, I did not mention that here. Sometimes I'll refer to that as intuitive logic. So to me, when I say intuitive logic, it actually is a way to, it reminds me to sort of step back and we're going to see that in a moment, right? When we look at a chart, I'll come back to that in a moment. You're just going to get a certain sense, right? And I want you to trust that, wherever you are. And then obviously by learning here, what we're learning about the Astrology of Wholeness principles, and then later on, especially when we talk about the first, second, and the third house and or a key from a marketing perspective, and even a branding, if you like, positioning, why those are going to be in your core gifts and so on and so forth, why those are going to be important. So I refer to the design primarily first at that, what is the geometry, right? Like when you look at the chart, what's the geometry? Sometimes and oftentimes, really, to me, it's always so compelling, even if it looks simple, even if it looks like one-sided or like a little bit more linear, or if it looks very complex, or if it looks kind of like a combination of different things, it speaks to itself. Now, I actually don't teach some of those patterns. I believe I think they're called chart patterns. I find that we can get stuck in those and then actually not employ our intuition. It's like, oh, what is that pattern? What's that pattern? It's like there is a particular definition to it. And while that's helpful, that's not what we're going to be studying. I actually am suggesting that when you look at the chart, you tune in from a geometry perspective, see if there's information available with that and your own knowing, and then focus if there is a particular organizing principle. It's just somewhere where you're going to be guided. Maybe there is more planets focused in, or there is more aspect lines leading to it. And if there is a particular dynamic that's visually planetary dynamic that's calling your attention, and we're going to learn actually from the next class why to focus in on the ascendant and descendant to start, okay? So for example, and I'm going to be highlighting that a lot today, is the importance of very much of focusing on the sun and the moon. Okay, that's going to be the big, big $1,000,000 question of today. Where do I focus in, right? So I've actually, this is a little bit more of a zoomed in. We're going to be looking at the charts in a moment as well, where you can see a more fuller perspective. So you can actually see Angelina's full chart and really see what is that geometry, what is that, what is your intuitive intelligence or the intuitive logic really suggest, where to focus in. And obviously a lot of that is going to be based on what, for example, from a consulting perspective, first of all, for you, what your core question is, why even you're looking, what are you looking to answer, right? What is your intention? What is your question? And then obviously from a consulting perspective, what your client's question is, what is their intention, okay? What are they looking to get clear on? But as I said, because I'm really am guided strongly to teach astrology from a wholeness perspective and then business, is what I am suggesting strongly. And if you have, again, strong Virgo Pisces polarity, right, the chances are you get that sense why it's important to not just basically look at sun and moon as a descriptors of our personality or even emotions, but really as a living, a breathing, pulsing with life and intelligence energies that are already part of who we are. We just need to be more aware of it. And looking at a chart allows us to project that awareness that we already have here, because we really already have it. We already have been working with our sun and moon, with these principles for eternity. It's just astrology allows us to see that a little bit more clearly, okay? So sun and the moon, the circle with a dot, and this crescent sign is your moon. And then we'll talk the ascendant, sun, moon, and ascendant are the so-called primary triad. Likely already familiar with that term, primary triad, primary trinity, I think sometimes referred to, or primal triad. I think some astrologers refer to it as a primal. I call it primary triad, or oftentimes as authenticity keys, especially in astrology for business classes. So what am I talking about when I look at, when we're discussing the design or the geometry is, right, when you, the first time look at the chart, let's say Angelina Jolie's chart, where are you drawn? Now I did highlight here just so it kind of makes it easier for you at this point, right? But you can see here how, right, there's just many of these aspect lines, which are basically telling us there is a particular geometric angle that is specific to this relationship here between Neptune, for example, and the trio of planets here. So we call this aspect trine, which we're not going to be discussing aspects here. I'm actually going to get more fundamental and at the same time intermediate. But they are referred to them occasionally as support lines. It kind of reminds me that the aspects are important, but if you don't get a sense of the archetypal relationship between that planet, that level of consciousness in a particular sign, which is like its operating strategy, or energetic template, you're going to be, yes, the aspects are helpful, but really they are a layer that that needs to come, I suggest, right after you get a clarity on the sign in the house. Okay, so can you see here how there's just, there's like, I refer to it as the organizing principle, like there's something that's organized there. And so that I will say typically to then, and now from a wholeness perspective, if we are saying let's pay attention to the sun and the moon, can you see here how, while the sun is highlighted here as well, let's say compared to Saturn, right? I mean, Saturn does have, there are a couple of aspects here, but can you see how that sun is like very much kind of integrated in this geometry that appears to like a rectangle of sort? But that moon is like definitely engaged there, right? And moon is a lunar principle. So even just looking at that, right? The moon is the feminine. And we know how, right, Angelina is very much involved, right, in furthering and advancing right, women's empowerment and even children, right, which is also, that's part of that as well. And really that's what she's committed to. But with the moon in Aries, it's a different, right? It's very much empowerment. And also from a ninth house perspective, close to the 10th, how she's used that visibly, we can see that will be more visible, potentially more traveling, which obviously we know she has done, and likely working with that element of risk because moon is in Aries. You see, so you can see how even just in a short, brief moment here, we can see that, right? And then we would add, which we're going to do that today as well, the sun as an important element. Now, if we look at Carl Jung's chart, what are you seeing here, right? So what I'm saying from a cosmic design perception here, giving yourself a moment the first time when you look at the chart. And I know it's like, oh, but Mom, there's just so much going on here. So, right, and I know for several of you have already seen this chart before, you know, if not in my classes, perhaps elsewhere. But one of the first things, and you can see that here, that anytime I look at Carl Jung's chart, and maybe now because that's what I expect to see as well on some level, I see a pyramid, right? Like I see a pyramid, and that's basically what I am. So that's, you know, I know subconsciously is already informing some of the information that I'm gathering here. So to me, when I see pyramid, I know there is some ancient wisdom here. And yes, right, it, you know, is there a connection with ancient Egypt? Like all of those questions will come and I will actually ask them intuitively. So you see what I mean? So there is an interaction here between me and the design, and then obviously clients' questions and what they're asking to receive in that moment, really, whether it's the first moment, whether it's before the session, right? I will always ask for clients to let me know, especially when we just start working together. Important because there's just so much information we can gain, and I am a big proponent of doing, at least at this, or really for the longest time, doing live readings. I know many people may like, and many astrologers, you know, they do recorded readings. They don't talk to clients and say they'll just record a read. They'll basically record it and then send it back, or you know, do written reports and so on and so forth. I love that live interaction in pretty much right now. It's 100% is how I operate. Meaning, what I'm saying is there is that interactive component that to me is important. Because it tells us really, because again, it's a map, right? 10 years ago, the map was the same, but the person was different. What they were working on, not just the age, but where they are right in their life. And 10 years later, right, it's going to be different. So now, can you see for like, okay, well, there is certain geometry now. Can you see how there is just so much focus? There seems to be a lot of these aspect lines. Now, I know when you look at different orbs that you can use in different programs, this may appear different, but this would be here primarily if you're, you know, if we're not using all the asteroids other than Chiron potentially and the nodes. And you see in this case, it actually, I don't think this particular format of Astro.com does not show aspect lines to nodes. So I do get that there would be some of those variances. Depending on what you include to see in the chart, definitely a lot busier, right? If you're going to include more elements, which I personally do not suggest. But obviously it's up to you, right? So you may have your own unique relationship with the cosmic design or with the geometry of the chart or the natal chart or whatever you want to refer to it, okay? So, and so once again here, we have a focus on the feminine element, right? So healing, right? Souls, like in this case, it's in Taurus. Feminine integration into psyche, more gentler here aspects in the third of communication. And then, you know, from a Astrology of Wholeness perspective, oh, okay, where is the sun, right? It's like we can see here, there is a more softer relationship with that feminine, more embodied is the invitation, but it's in the third, so it's actually used in communication, which obviously Jung has used extensively working with clients. And then sun in the seventh. But what's important is this really is a receptive moon, right? Moon is a receptive energy. It isn't a receptive sign, Earth. And so to me, when I tune into that, it just really, I can see that that's a moon that's like, okay, I can sit and allow the images to come, which is, I believe, would have been one of his strategies or ways. Now, obviously, there are other here elements that speak to that, but can you see how that sun in the 7th would also be drawing him to having interactions, regular interactions with people, like creating those relationships and so on and so forth. And we will talk more about that in terms of how to integrate the sun and the moon. Dalai Lama, look at that design. We've seen that many times. I'm definitely super impressed from a just really knowing, obviously, the magnitude of his influence in the world, and then also seeing how that is translated into the actual design. Now, you may find this design in your chart, and many people do. Now, not many people will have what's referred to as the grand trine, and then this actually now a component here where we have 3 planets that are basically in an exact distance between each other, like so-called 120-degree, right, so-called trine. Most often they would be in the same sign. Sometimes they can be out of sign. In this case, it's a water, right, grand water trine. But you see 2 planets are also in a harmonious here, so-called sextile aspect to this part of the design here, Moon Neptune. But let's stop the chit-chat here for a moment and just tune into this. If you want to stop the video, if you haven't seen this before, and so you're not even listening to me for a moment, and just I wanted to tune in and see what are you, if anything, right? You're not looking here to be bombarded with information. I mean, set the intent just to, if there's one thing here that you're meant to hear or know about this design, what is that? What would that be? And then when you come back to it, right, is, so, you may be drawn here to that Saturn in the 9th, or that sun right on the ascendant, which is very significant in Dalai Lama's chart, in the archetype representing compassion, and the 1st house of embodiment, right? So he's an embodiment of that compassion and kindness, which he very often talks about. He's known as the embodiment of Buddha, right? Which is really compassion. And but you can see also, can you see how this particular, which to me when I look at it, like it looks like a bow and an arrow, right? There's this it appears to be coherent organization, if you like, or the geometry. Yes, there's another right here, not as perfect rectangle and so on. You may see something even different here. And please allow that, because there is a reason that you're going to be potentially seeing something different. And I want to bring your attention right to this, how, and I've got that on the left-hand side, like there's like a bow and arrow from my perspective, and how that allows me here, like it just really tells me, there are these 3, 4, 5 elements that are important, including Moon and the Neptune here, that are in a so-called conjunction. But look at how they're connected, literally like an arrow kind of shooting in the direction of Saturn, and Saturn in the 9th is about like international reach and infinite reach, as I like to refer to it, and in learning, right, and education. And he recently, right, and I mean, of everything that he's done in terms of educating humanity on the importance, and children, right, in schools, on the importance of combining different, I would say like education of wholeness in many ways. He refers to it in a different way, but 9th and is the higher education area, right? It's the travel, it's the international, being an international, really the ambassador of, and Saturn in the 9th will give us ideas here, what that is. Saturn requires, I refer to it as the pointer towards our most significant work. Many astrologers will refer to it as the pointer of difficult lessons. But God knows, and we know that we need to have those sometimes, significant learning in order to create something that has a lasting value. And more recently, I think earlier 2019, that he launched that school. I may even have a slide on that in one of I've shared it in, I believe it was in the intermediate course. Anyway, you may be able to check that out. And I mean, a lot of what he has done, right, in terms of the interfaith and perspective. But this moon Neptune, we're going to talk a lot about, and even later on, how that's representative of his meditative nature, right, and how he relates to the mind, and so on, and quieting of the mind, and so on and so forth. Okay, so at this point, if you'd like, right, depending on where you are, whether you're ambitious beginner to intermediate or somewhere in between, maybe even if you're consider yourself in some ways more advanced than intermediate, but maybe there are still some symbols that you're struggling with. Okay. So I would suggest, if you do feel that you need to sort of brush up a little bit on the symbology, is to print out your natal chart and then write out the 12 signs around it. Or if you're like, well, I know half of them, maybe 80% of them, then print it out and then just write out the ones that you're not familiar with, right? So the chart doesn't have to be super busy as it is here. Then just write out the symbols, or the spell out the signs that you're maybe a little bit less familiar with, okay? If you want to go a step further, depending on where you feel like, oh, I got my symbols down, right? Like I've done astrology for a number of years, so you're cool with that. And maybe there are some symbols of the planets you still want to get clear on and refresh your memory, then you may want to do that, right? Write out like I've got here, Saturn, write that out. And or which a lot of people, even in an intermediate level, sometimes can struggle until our really eye is so gets used to reading a lot of charts, is to know the cusps, right? And I will bring that in as to why that is important. To many astrology schools, they do not refer to a lot the importance of the cusps and then the rulers of the cusp, but from a precision perspective. And I'll be bringing more this in starting today, but really in most of what I teach, why that is important. And so, right, the first house starts right here at the ascendant, and I'll share a couple more slides today just to help you to, from today, if you are at somewhere between beginner and intermediate, that you, at this point, you need to have that strong understanding of where the ascendant is in the chart, and then sun and the moon. And to get into a habit right after you've seen the design and allowed yourself a moment or two of taking that in, is to look for the sun and the moon. And it's almost like ground yourself so that you can, because our mind is wandering, and sometimes we can be, depending on where our Mercury is in our own chart, we could be drawn to like so many shiny objects in a chart, even asteroids and all kinds of things, and midheaven, and wherever the planets are more constellated. But what I'm suggesting, we do need to have a stronger foundation, and to keep coming back to that. Again, it could be just my Taurus sun, but either way, I know that's a big part of my purpose, to help you to really, once again, have a strong foundation in your astrological education and path, okay? You've seen this slide many times before, and the upcoming slides that give you a distilled list and tables of the sign archetypes and then their shadow expression. So I've got here really keywords for each sign that, in my experience, are the most important to keep in mind when we're looking at that. If you want to like simplify, right, when you're reading a chart or reading a cusps and or where planets are, right? So action for Aries, peace for Taurus, but peace and pleasure, right? I've got several words here as well. Amazement and curiosity for Gemini, kindness and compassion for Cancer, joy and love here, or heart-centered approach for Leo, well-being and service orientation for Virgo, but also orderliness and efficiency, harmony for Libra, and peace, power and trust for Scorpio, enthusiasm and vision and visioning for Sagittarius, resilience and goal achievement, right, for Capricorn, and individuality and equality and innovation for Aquarius, and ease and grace and flow for Pisces. Okay, and then what we also have is shadow expressions. So I'll leave you with that. I still always come back to this in my own mind, to just because there's always going to be new layers you're going to be returning to it. But sometimes a chart can be intriguing, and I find that especially when we learn a lot more, we can sometimes get carried away with shiny objects and then forget the fundamental purpose of the sign, because it really is one of my fundamental beliefs. And maybe I'll add that to my Astrology of Wholeness, but that's a little bit different. It's more like my philosophy or my relationship with cosmos, is that it really is a whole lot more simpler. Now, of course, it's complex at the same time, right? It's a paradox. It's just, I mean, when you think about how everything is functioning, like I'm in awe every single day as to, how our body functions, how you and I, relate to each other, how the world works, how technology works, and everything. But really, the things that we're meant to know more of, like the chart is really looking to help us. Okay, the design in front of us is looking to help us. It's not meant to be more complicated than saying wherever you have Taurus in your chart, you need to be more at peace. Take your time. This is what I'm referring to easier reading of the cusps, right? You may have spent years reading books or studying, and then you're still trying to overcomplicate or read, feeling like you need, I don't know how many, 15 reference books in order to remember, right? Oh, what does that mean? What does that mean? Don't get caught in the phrasing. And it can be helpful, but at the fundamental level, I do suggest to almost like retrain your mind also. What is the key thing here I need to know? And then you can, embellish, and you can add to it. You can obviously add layers as you're guided. So, but wherever we have Aries, we need to be bold. Wherever we have Taurus, be at peace and simplify, right? Be learning oriented, willing to multitask, be more adaptable where we have Gemini, be more caring and compassionate, forgiving where we have Cancer, likable where we have Leo, healthy and organized where we have Virgo, social and balanced and client friendly and people friendly where we have Libra. But of course, aware also of the shadow, right? People pleasing and being, could be conflict avoidant there as well. So I've got that here for you. Be aware of our power, or be aware of our shadow or shadow projections as well, wherever we have Scorpio. Be enthusiastic, as in really work with positive expectations wherever you have Sagittarius. Don't take it for granted. If you have it rising, if you have North Node there, if you have the Sun in Sagittarius, this actually needs to be a conscious choice for you on a daily basis. Be resilient and results oriented wherever you have a Capricorn. Be free and change oriented wherever you have Aquarius, and be once again at ease. And so you want to be working wherever you have Pisces and or Neptune, by the way. This also is going to apply to the planets here that I've listed as rulers of these archetypes. Okay. Now, this is my distilled version of how really to know what are we doing in these different sectors of a chart. And we'll talk a couple more times today, at least, about the houses. Of course, we're going to talk plenty about them throughout the course and beyond. Here, this column shows you different even extensions, you could say expansions of us, but really other people as well in our life. Can show up in those areas, and our relationship, and really how we show up in those relationships. Oftentimes astrologers, and we will refer to it as like the 7th is the partner, the 3rd is the siblings, the 4th is the father, 10th is the mother, and we'll simplify that and talk about that as well. But I do need you to keep in mind it's primarily us actually in those relationships. Okay. Anyway, we're leading in the 1st, we're selling and offering, we're contributing in the 2nd, and we're also building resources. We're building our self-respect. Okay, we're building our net worth and self-worth and net worth in the 2nd. We're promoting, from a business perspective, we're promoting messaging, keeping in touch, increasing our messaging credibility. We'll talk about that a bit throughout the course. We're dialoguing, right? We're building a platform. Very important 3rd house from business perspective, and being successful in business in particular. We're nesting in the fourth. You know, what are we doing in the fourth? We're nesting, we're anchoring, we're being rooted, we're connecting with our roots, we're creating shelter, we're healing family myths, right? We're healing potentially trauma, especially intergenerational trauma. We're building a home, we're creating family, okay? We're celebrating in the fifth, creating, playing, loving. We're serving and healing and streamlining in the sixth. We are relationship building. This is very important because there is just a lot of astrology out there. Oh, seventh, this is your partner. And then instantaneously your mind shifts to now talking about the partner, and it's the partner, the people. Well, you are, my friend, relationship building in the seventh house. It is what I refer to as your social consciousness oriented self. It's your social consciousness primarily. And then as a result of how you're wired in that way and how you relate to that aspect of you, meaning how you show up in social situations, this is actually how the people who you attract. So now we don't have to get into, you know, what comes first, chicken or the egg, but I think you got the idea there. We're healing relationship wounds in the eighth. So very important to get this. I have Sun in the eighth, so I'm so passionate about talking about this as well, because there's just so much misunderstanding about the planets in the eighth house. Okay, we're building trust. We're learning how to allow more support and vulnerability, and we're integrating shadows. We're breaking taboos. We're building intimacy and growing in empowerment. We're visioning, learning what's possible, exploring what's possible in the ninth, increasing our reach and horizons, right? If you employ these, like can you see how you're going to have just lots to talk about in more specific ways, and yet allow for some empowering language here to emerge that you're going to come up with, okay? 10th, we're delivering our service promises. We're delivering our purpose. We're delivering our mission. We're building three, here I've got, we could say three-dimensional vehicle, but really what I'm talking here is, you know, we're speaking in the third, but here we are actually now delivering on what we're talking about in the third house, okay? We're building integrity. In the 11th, we're building community, making impact. In the 12th, we are soul aligning. Again, there's so much misunderstanding around the 12th house as well. Oh, we're suffering. Oh, we are, you know, the house of self-undoing. Oh, again, a lot of in the traditional community when, you know, it's, you know, oh, secrets, oh, this and that. Well, it's different in a spiritual community, meaning when we're already working with the concept of what the 12th house asks of us, that's when you're actually tapping into its potential, which out of all the areas in the chart can be the most infinite in terms of understanding our multidimensional nature. But if that's not what we are doing, if we're looking to approach in a very logical way, especially if that's not what is part of our design, right? Like we can have a logical planet, like for example, Dalai Lama has Mercury in the 12th. And in Gemini, by the way, right? So it's a logical planet in a logical sign, by the way, very strong Mercury in Gemini in the 12th. So, but this is why he talks about the mind. So he does have a logical, right, access to, which is why he talks about the mind, importance of quieting the mind and, you know, disciplining the mind. So he's realized that he needs to find a language to express it and share it with others. Anyway. Yes, we're realizing God but our higher self as well in the 12th. And just another slide here that you can work with to ask some questions. So rather than here coming up with statements, we're actually asking questions that can allow you, maybe you have Saturn in a certain area, or maybe you have Venus in a certain area. So you want to get some sense of what that planet represents. I'll have some slides towards the end because I don't want to get too specific because that would take forever on spending a lot of time on each sign, on each planet, right? That's not the idea. I actually want you to have more of a wholeness perspective and also know where to focus in to get started, okay? And so at this point, right now, we've talked about the archetypes, And by the way, your relationship with understanding them and working with them is going to be a lifetime, right? So I am, if you're obviously interested, there is always more that you can learn, right, through different, obviously, books and information, and even working with that. But once again, great starting point, right, for you to simply take some one or two keywords that from the sheets that I just shared. And then if you'd like, just add them here. You may not want to do that for everything, but maybe at this point for the sun and the moon, and maybe some of the planets or here, basically symbols or planets, right, that you may have not connected as much in the past, right? Or even your rising sign. Just as a reminder, this is what I'm referring to as the easier way to read, rather than, again, referring to a reference book. Just, and this is going to take some time to get used to this. The chances are most of you already are, but I can tell, again, I've been studying for 3 decades now and practicing for just many years, and teaching for now a decade. And I'm still reminding myself of some of the basic principles, and I'm still discovering them, like in a more embodied way. So really, there's just so much that I find that the chart and the design wants to really communicate to us when we work even with this basic, being decisive where you have Aries, right? Embracing more simplicity and deliciousness and enjoyment in the present moment with Taurus, and so on and so forth. Being more specific where you have Capricorn. So just write these keywords here. Let's say for Angelina here, we would say it could be dialogue oriented with her sun in Gemini, and being bold and or decide, right? Being decisive where she has Moon in Aries. But we're going to learn that a little bit. Today you want to keep in mind also that obviously the moon is going to feel different than the sun, right? So it's a different, they have a different function. They feel different in our body. So here's that example, right? If we just simplify, rather than it's like, oh, I have to understand the whole chart. You do not need to understand the whole chart. Even whether you have a particular question, I guarantee you that 90% of the questions, if not 95, you heard me say this before, 95% of the questions that you have, like major dilemmas in your life, I guarantee you, if you were to come back to your sun and the moon and really a little bit more deeply understand the sign and the house and integrate that and work with that on a daily basis, they will, I don't care how many other aspects, other asteroid things, or even other planets that you feel are in some way making it difficult. In my humble and maybe not so humble experience, as I like to cheekily say, even when you do have other elements that, let's say Saturn and so on and so forth, Mars, Pluto, right? Uranus is like, oh my God, I'm going to have changes in this area of life. When I have Uranus in the 4th, what does that mean? When I have Uranus in the 4th, right? From my family life, what does it mean when I have Saturn in the 12th, right? We tend to go there. In my experience, and I'm saying I'm still discovering this. Like there's just a continuous new discovery of this. But what I'm finding over and over, that there's a visible that we're able to tap in, that the universe really, I know, like 1,000,000% over, is looking to communicate to us in simple and immediately accessible ways. Astrology is one of those ways. When we just know where to focus in, when we have a certain intention. And when we look at the sun and the moon, even if there are other elements, they're like, oh, but I have to, what about Neptune? Focus on the sun and the moon. Work with these simple principles. In my experience, okay, you will, they're basically what I'm saying, there are layers of understanding the sun and the moon. Of course, you're going to keep discovering, but there are layers that are actually not easily they can feel like they're not easily accessible, but they're actually present there. And I know we're going to be discovering them. I know I'm going to be discovering them. Part of that you could say, well, Milada, what are you really talking about? Well, what I'm to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. Like there is a sign, there is the house, right? But what about the degree? We haven't even scratched the surface, like even in astrological field in terms of the meaning of degrees. That's what I'm talking about. There's a other, you could say, esoteric levels of meaning. They're actually available to us through the sun and the moon. Is what I'm saying, that there are 90% of this, I really deeply believe this and know, that are actually available if you were to just even energetically tune in to that. Let's say for Angelina Jolie, the sun in Gemini in the 11th house, without even looking at the rest of the chart. Of course it's important, but it actually energetically is accessible to her, even if she would not to necessarily logically work on comprehending sun in Gemini, even though that actually for her would be suggested, right? Because sun in Gemini does suggest to obviously develop her communication gift, right? Be in a dialogue, let's say with her friends, organizations, and so, to express her ideas, right? So it's actually giving her specific ways to specific activities and habits, if you like, to take to create certain experiences, to basically become a better version of herself, if you like, to fulfill her purpose, whatever your angle may be. So Venus here, for example, I've got here, even though we're not going to so much focus on that, but it's important because for me, it's where it is positioned in her chart is right on her ascendant, right? So Venus is the harmonizing, right? It's the perspective that helps us to create relationships in life, to make peace with ourselves, with people, wherever that may be, indicated in our chart. The ascendant, as we're going to learn, especially in the next class, represents the body, and making peace with her body is one of the fundamentals here, but also with her role as a mother, but also from a perspective of self-acceptance. So doing forgiveness work, right? Self-forgiveness would be crucial, actually making peace with her own beauty, right? Which you wouldn't necessarily maybe know that she would have issues with that, but I can see that astrologically, right? And so on and so forth. Here, then on the other hand, she's got Capricorn on the other hand here on the 7th cusp of that represents partners, right? But it's really her own, where she needs to be more mature, or she needs to be more organized. She needs to basically be more goal oriented. And I shared in some other classes, right, how Brad Pitt actually has several planets in Capricorn. Now, it just so happens, I mean, this doesn't work like that in most cases, that you will actually attract a partner in your life that has the exact sign emphasized that you have on the 7th house, but oftentimes it will be in a significant way. It doesn't have to be the sun sign. It can be instant. It could be their rising sun. It could be their moon, okay? But fundamentally, it's not about Brad Pitt or her first or second relationship or whatever relationship. It's her own here. Basically, remember, we're in the 7th house, her relationship, her building. This is her key. We don't even have to go into the details, but just in terms of the energy here, that is the key for her to connect in socially, is what I'm referring to here, okay? Now, there is the part here, we talked about the design and the chart part of the chart, right? Or that astro.com, right, image. But there is the bottom part of it as well that's important, which is the aspectarian table. And I did cover it out here with a couple of quotes. And I said we're not going to be super referring to more in the supporting role. So the aspects are going to serve here as supporting role. Primarily, we're going to be referring to the signs and the houses, because I find, again, even at an advanced level, I'm shocked to see how much people like to focus more on the aspects than on the fundamentals. And then when you ask them just to share information about how you can be a better version of whatever that sign is, they're going to slip into the descriptive mode rather than helpful mode, okay? And I'm sure I've done that as well. And, and this is why I'm strongly guided to bring that awareness in terms of we got to be helpful rather than judgmental and try to be to the best of our ability, right? Service oriented. Really, what will serve the person? What will serve you as your own client, first of all? So part of the Aspectarian is also where you're going to notice this little chart here, or table rather, where that has these 3 columns titled CFM. They stand for cardinal, fixed, and mutable. This is not going to be fundamental for you to understand, but I do want you to get curious a little bit, especially if you notice a chart, maybe your own, that doesn't either has no planets in one of those columns or rows, or maybe one, which we refer to as a singleton. So without actually getting into describing that, I'm going to have some slides at the very end of today for you to just explore, because this could take another 3 classes just to talk about the elements. I found some quotes that I wanted just to share. So when Angelina says, "I cannot sit still," and then we look at her chart and she has no planets in a fixed element, I want you just to get curious. That is all. That's why we travel so much. No planets fixed, no fixed element. But look at those cardinal planets here, which is about movement, okay? In case you are not familiar. I don't like perfumes that are too strong or sweet. I like a fragrance that is earthy and sensual and can be worn at any time. She has no planets in earth. Now you could say, but Milada, maybe somebody with a lot of earth would say that as well, and they may. And we'll talk about, periodically how this will, but at this point I want you just to get curious. So real food, I found, is actually better than dieting. So she has realized in her own way, right, that the earth, which really food, the physical representation of earth element, is good, real food, right, not processed food. Okay, so just another here to recap to, at this point, if you are not aware, I want you to just start being more familiar with what the houses are that you can locate, right? So let's say in Angelina Jolie's chart, where would be the 10th house? Like right here, right? It starts here, right at this point that we refer to as the midheaven, or MC, the top of her chart. And then it goes all the way to the cusp of the 11th, right? What about her 6th house here? It starts here right at between the 5th and the 6th is the cusp. This is the cusp. And that's the beginning of the 6th house. This is the 6th house. And then it goes all the way to the cusp of the 7th and so on. Okay. These are just some of the keywords for each house: health, wealth, communication, family, creativity, service, relationships. Now, 8 is referred to as death and transformation. It can just sound a little, I find, scary to people. Now, debt can also sound a little scary depending on what our relationship is with it. But it is important, I believe, to consider that. And it's a whole lot more here. It is about empowerment ultimately, but that can also be like, it's a little overused word, right? Relationship, right, where a relationship build really healing the wounds, okay? And also debt in terms of karmic debt, but also you could say financial, really anything that we feel like where we need to actually surrender to either receive support from others and or even our own metaphysical self, really. And heal fear is important. I'm spending a little bit more time because in my experience, oftentimes people are, even astrologers, look, oh my God, my 8th house. Journeys, career, friends, and sacrifice. Important, I believe, because it is to, we, even as healers, we tend to spend time here with that, working to shift that, whether we have strong 12th house, or even it could be, let's say, when you have a same element on the 1st and the 12th, or the same sign rather. Now, a little bit more on the meaning of different houses. So I'm gonna just leave that here with you rather than reading everything. So I've placed, for example, higher mind in the 9th and international reach, your big vision. father in the fourth, and the ancestors, that's pretty traditional. Healing habits and duty and daily work in the sixth. Relationships, consulting clients, teamwork, social skills, and also the beginning of understanding of our shadow, awareness of our shadow starts in the seventh. And positive self-image, personal, and really all personal matters. Very, very, first house is very personal, but also leadership, health, body, style, vitality, so on and so forth, okay? Obviously business, the 10th, and also mother is, I place in the 10th, okay? Okay, so let's talk about now these, so we talk about the importance of the sun and the moon. So hopefully at this point you are getting a sense of why those two elements are important in case you haven't already realized that or worked with that, okay? Now, in my experience, I have also found, again, from a both effectiveness perspective and also wholeness perspective and really many health perspective, why it is important that we start teaching more and learning more about these different partnerships that are really already operating, but if we're not really aware that they are, we just can't really fully, I find, access the importance of not just looking at, for example, your Saturn and get stuck on the Saturn. You need to understand what's Jupiter, also where Jupiter is blessing you, right? Or just the moon. We need to balance that out with the sun as well. So the primary energetic partnerships, right, which we already talked about, and we're going to talk more about that today, is the sun and the moon. This is your primary, I'm here referring to as the sacred partnership that we have to honor. How does my solar nature accommodate my lunar needs to help me heal and feel safe and well? And how can my primordial lunar healing, meaning your moon, right, support a creation of vital life experiences that help you to stretch, grow your essential solar expression? So that's what we're going to spend a little bit more today. There is the ascendant and the descendant, right? A lot of time I find people and astrologers are focused on the ascendant, and they're not enough until there's like a relationship question focused on the seventh. But they exist in polarity already, and if you're just overly focusing here, you're going to be missing out on understanding really fundamental aspects of you that are very much looking to be expressed in a harmonious way on this spectrum of that polarity. So how do I reconcile my key relationship axis? We'll talk about this next time. A higher coherence, leadership focus. We'll talk about this in the class on when we talk about the marketing. The nodal axis, we'll talk about that throughout the course. And then the key competency axis integration is a little bit more advanced, and so this would be basically when there is a particular opposition in your chart, okay? So just to kind of, somewhere in the back of your mind, if you do have that sort of one of those red lines in your chart that connect two planets, like if you recall in Dalai Lama's chart was that Moon, Neptune, and then Saturn opposition. That actually is important, as I recognize a critical competency that we need to gain. Anyway, but don't worry about that now. That's a little bit more next level. And we will be talking more about that in the advanced course, along with the secret partnership of Venus and Mars. We'll touch on that here throughout this course as well, but focus on that a little bit more then, because it really is important that you got the foundation strong. And then the Sun and Mercury, even a little bit more, because it's really plays into consulting very much. But we will talk about it in when we talk about the marketing and your messaging as well. We'll touch on the interceptions and more from a answer a question perspective. And if you're taking the course during the time, I need to mention this because this course will be available in a digital format, but if you're taking it during the time when a weekly Q&A support is available, that's what I'm referring to on the understanding the interceptions. It's a more advanced concept. And then what I mentioned earlier, the planetary opposition here mentioned again from an advanced perspective. Okay, so we're actually going to go a little bit deeper here into understanding the luminaries. And if at this point you're like, okay, I had, enough, like your cup is full for today, you want to stop the video and then continue this tomorrow. Okay, so from a perspective of the sun and the moon, from a wholeness perspective, as well as psychological perspective, we look at the sun and the moon as the archetypal father and mother. Okay, the moon is really it's the archetypal mother, it's the image, the archetypal mother image that we already actually bring in with us. Okay, and I talk a little bit more about this in my healing-oriented courses, especially when we talk about healing the mother and father image. So we're not going to get into super detail, but I will talk a little bit more about this today, because from a wholeness perspective, we do need to keep this in mind because it can be helpful. Now, we're not going to be like blaming things on our parents, and this is why my mom is this way. Oh, this is why, my dad is this way, because that's not what it's about. But it is because, again, we bring these images with us, and then the external parents or the biological parents or the external guardians parents, they reflect that. We tend to notice those things more based on our sun and the moon sign. Now, sure, we can then talk about karma and all these other things, soul contracts. But I want you to what I'm suggesting rather is for you to keep that in mind more as how you can help inform, meaning knowing your relationship with the moon principle or even your biological mother, how you can inform a healthier, more effective expression or even a relationship with your own inner mother. Okay, this is what I'm talking about, because this is so important for your healing, for your receiving, for your knowing how to rest, knowing when to take a break, knowing, where you need to forgive. And then, or in the process of individuation and self-realization and even leadership, very important to heal your relationship with and really embody your solar self. Okay, so they are the so-called luminaries, are also referred to as the divine parents. Okay, so from a metaphysical perspective. So the internal images of the parental marriage is essential in the child-adult development, right? So refer to that as a divine masculine and feminine. You will hear me refer to that more as a solar and a lunar principle, just because I feel it's a little bit more whole to look at it that way. And once we start getting an understanding of it, I do believe that it's more descriptive of its ultimate purpose. Than just, even though I know it's important to, we got to understand that also it's masculine and feminine, they operate differently. But I find our human mind can also just pass sort of gender-based judgment onto that. And then depending on our own gender, and then, whether we're talking about the masculine principle or even feminine, it can bring up very different stories into that. So I also wanted to remind you that it's not absolutely so that the sun represents father only and the moon represents mother only. This is why it is important that, right, especially in this day and age, that I suggest we look at the solar and the lunar principle, because it really is the principle itself that the parent is representing. And in today's day and age, the same parent can actually play both principles depending on what is expected of them, right? And also what their assignment is. So, for example, a single mother or influential mother can be exhibiting both solar and lunar qualities for the child, right? Especially if mother, let's say a Leo sun mother, that's actually meant to really be more solar in her expression. And then if in your chart you have sun in the 10th house, which actually then describes the mother as being more solar. Now you can also translate that as being strong, right? There are many ways depending on the sign that the sun is in, or, when you have moon in the fourth, more lunar father. Now, I know we're going a little bit more advanced here, and I know many of you are in that case, and this is an important perspective. We don't have to get stuck or even spend too much time on this, but it is important from a wholeness perspective to start at least, or maybe dive a little bit more into this whenever it serves you. Because we're forever in a relationship. They are forever already in a relationship in our psyche, and then the external world will reflect that, right? So the sun indicates where we're likely to encounter, what really we're likely to encounter in our self-realization and individuation journey. Individuation from what? Individuation from mom, from the umbilical connection, right? From even the womb towards father, or if you like, role model, right? Because it's not even just father, it's the father principle. We still need to, we do archetypally in our collective human record, if you like, repository of archetypes, we all do relate to the father principle and the mother principle. So the moon indicates what we're likely to encounter in our growing up journey, in healing journey, in our wellness journey, in our relationships. Now you could say that both of them also can serve both purposes, and they do. And it's also going to depend on the sign that they are in. Because if the sun, the solar principle, is in Cancer, lunar principle, right? You can see how it can get a little bit like, oh my goodness, right? So it's important to then know we're talking about the solar principle, which is about creating experiences, right, that are needed for fulfillment of our purpose. And then we're talking about the lunar principle, because we could have the moon in Leo, which can feel almost like a sun in Leo, but it's a different way of that we're meant to, or really we already are basically relating to them in a different way. Just a little bit of here, rather than like discussing all of the different elements, which I'm going to have some summary sheets for you in the end, some of the slides. I just want you first primarily to, it's also a way to sort of easier read different and understand different signs, is that anytime we're talking about a fire sign, such as Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, okay, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, we're working with a more energizing, and we need to energize and radiate what? Self in Aries, we're energizing and radiating confidence, for example, in Leo, and we're energizing and radiating what in Sagittarius? Enthusiasm, right? And if you have those signs highlighted, you likely already have been experiencing that. With Gemini and Libra and Aquarius, we are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, right? We are connecting and sharing ideas. In Gemini, with like-minded. In Libra, we're with collaborators, partners, and in Aquarius, with whom? With our group, with groups, organizations, with larger ideas that are larger even than, obviously, than our immediate circles, okay? So just a little bit, giving a little bit more of a bigger kind of perspective that you can still to help you simplify this, so that anytime you see a water sign, a planet in a water sign, Venus in Pisces, what does the Venus need to do here? Oh, feel and heal, right? How? Well, from a Venusian perspective, from that collaborative, you could say, or from a relationship perspective, depending also what house it is in. Now, the difference between Cancer, Pisces, and Scorpio is that in Cancer, it's going to be more softer, even feminine. In Pisces, even softer than Cancer. In Cancer, more security-oriented, more safety-oriented. In Pisces, more spiritual, as you're going to learn through the slides and your experience. And then in Scorpio, it's going to feel more like more powerful, and also looking at some of the shadowy, like the underpinning, right, of whatever it is coming through. And then lastly, the Earth energy, right? It helps us to, when we're looking at Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, it helps us to stabilize and embody. So what are we stabilizing? What are we embodying? Well, in Taurus, it is worth. I suggest in Virgo, it is well-being. And in Capricorn, it is resilience. Okay? You could also say achievement and so on. Okay? So if that makes sense there. I have a little bit more on the elements, and I'm actually going to leave this with you to just read up a little bit on the fire, as I refer to it as the medicine. So remember, one of the principles I had there for Astrology of Wholeness is that we can receive elements and also energies, but just when we say elements, it kind of gives it to us, to our human mind, a little bit more of something we can relate to, not just archetypally, but we can relate to it as an actual element in the nature, right? Not the exact same thing, because we're talking archetypal energy, and then we have a representation of that. We have physical representation of that in the nature. And then also I've added here some vibrational tones and sounds, because fire is definitely a whole lot more loud and hot and energizing than earth is a more grounding and silent. And in Virgo, however, busy. So there's more of that buzzing, right? Ruled by Mercury. In Capricorn, more somber and melancholic. Okay. Air, definitely the buzz of the information, right? The wind. In Gemini, there's that mind chatter as an example of, just to make it a little bit more descriptive, right? Visualizable, embodiable, if you like, in terms of how these different elements or even principles operate and how they relate astrologically. Libra, harmonious sounds, beautiful sounds. Aquarius, technology, electricity, light and light technology. And then what we refer to as the Eureka, Einstein effect, right? This is where the genius element and the innovation, right? It's like, when you got that idea, that's your Aquarius, okay? It could be Gemini and Mercury as well, but again, depending on whether it's like you're busy, or you are, you made a discovery, okay? And then the water is there's that soothing, cooling. In Cancer, more like a lake, a nurturing energy, right? Scorpio, more like a whooshing river, or dark and intense and deep and secretive. And then in Pisces, more like the ocean sounds and more meditative and unity, consciousness, and relaxation oriented. Okay. So you can read up more on that. And a little bit of a recap here. Why Sun-Moon integration? So hopefully I already share the importance of that, and the chances are you already are in many ways familiar, but always bears repeating. So in case whatever part of you is still like, oh, right, I've heard that before. I still, again, even with intermediate, advanced astrologers and practitioners, find intuitive and the logical ones, really, everybody who is, relating to world in this archetypal way, but still potentially, it's just, I think it's the nature of the time we're in, right? It's just very mercurial. There's just always another blog, always another, shiny object or something. We forget how we have some of these fundamental keys, and that dissonance or an unresolved power battle between your sun and the moon, but like inner war that could be going on, or inner conflict. I see war because I have Sun-Moon square, and I have Venus-Mars square. So God and Venus in Aries, right? It's contrarian. Moon in Aquarius, in a Sun's contrarian as well. So I've definitely had to work on this, and I still need to continue to. So it basically takes a lot of our time and energy, emotional, mental, and mood, if we're kind of battling. And by the way, right, you're going to see this in your relationship with your father and mother principle as well, right? Hint, hint, to also give you ideas as to where you need to focus more. So solution is integrating your Sun-Moon energetic partnership more fully. And I've got a little bit more here for you to read. And then a key consideration here that I already shared earlier. Okay, and then a couple of slides on just simplifying this even more, a couple of slides on why it is important that you're nurturing your essential lunar needs. Okay, so you can work with this slide to basically just your sun and house of the moon. And I've got some journaling questions or questions to prompt your inquiry, and also mantras that are part of this that can help you to simplify this in a meaningful way. I hope, I know it has been for many clients and students and many of you as well. So it is now safe for me to be, to receive, to heal, and feel, or even just simply be. And then you're going to add some keywords that relate to your moon sign. I am now safely expressing my daily need for. There's just so much, like infinite work, and yet available on just your moon sign. And yet, even when you make gradual step-by-step progress, using the simple formulas here that I'm suggesting, I promise you is going to be transformational. And yet there is always like another layer. So where I most need to receive healing medicine, nurturing, become aware of my essential needs to love, accept, heal within. And we're going to see this in an example in a moment. How can I feel better and more safe to be me? Right? I feel safe and comforted to when? Here's literally a simple right way that you can phrase and relate to your lunar needs. I feel supported when I'm ready to accept that my inner being needs more of, right, in order for you to experience more emotional fulfillment. This is so essential, right? Need I say more? And then discovering your solar expression. The difference here is now you're consciously and daily, even more consciously becoming, because you see with the moon, we can work in a more imaginative way. We can work even in a more like relaxed way, regardless of the sign that it is in, but the sign that it is in and the house that it's going to give us more information as to different subtones to that. But definitely when you're working with your sun, and right, when you're working with the fire element and then fire and air, more expressive elements, then we got to be more even working with, you know, confidently and creatively expressing. So definitely in your solar expression, that you're consciously and creatively creating experience and fulfilling your needs. You're not waiting for somebody to bring you that glass of water, right? You're actually creating experiences. And I'm thinking Sun in Cancer, I know maybe not the best example, right? Reading with a glass of water, but hopefully you get an idea. Sun in Cancer, Sun in Pisces, you need to create experiences to relax and to maybe, I don't know, be closer to water and so on in the ocean and so on and so forth, right? I'm cultivating my skills and willingness to. I'm creating my own luck here, right? We're not different with the moon. With the moon, we're actually opening up to receive, which is equally important. And with where we have the sun, we also need to be a role model, to be a leader, to grow as a person. If you're looking to be an influencer, to be a more effective leader, to be even more successful, it is essential that you are discovering your solar expression and integrating that with your lunar expression. And here is an example with Angelina. Right? So she needs to heal her wildish self. Where did I get wildish? Well, it's going to be in one of your slides there. And with the moon in Aries, allow emotional clarity. It's one of the key things that with the moon in Aries, we need to allow and create. Many people may not really get that unless they have moon in Aries. How important it is for moon in Aries to be aware of how they feel and also what they need and say, I need. Right, being clear even, first of all, not even say, first be clear what their needs are. And then heal stress, heal anxiety, right? This is going to be in your slides on the moon. I'm going to have actually a few more that you can use specifically with the moon in all of the signs, okay? And when the sun in Gemini, create dialogue to increase social impact. Dialogue, remember, dialogue-oriented Gemini, why? Social impact, 11th house. See how we can it does, right, require a distillation of knowing what are the key activities we need to take, but there is, right, so much here that we can get out of this. And here's a little bit of, you can read through that with Angelina's essential lunar needs: to be seen, to be wild, allowing herself to be wild woman warrior, right? I'm combining the moon and Aries, so moon in blue here, and then more pink, red, Aries, courageous feminine, strong feminine. So now, again, we're not judging, we're just translating this. When you speak to the client and you share this with her, the importance, right? It is now safe for you to be seen. You want to see what the client is going to, you will be surprised how relevant it is, because from our perspective, we may not always see that, but it is relevant for the client, right? That actually has that in their chart. And then her solar expression sheet, right? So working with that, right? Community building, making a difference in the world. That's where she needs to be a role model. That's that sun in Gemini in the 11th. Here is Oprah example, okay, with the moon in Sagittarius, close to in the 11th, close to the 12th. Tell me about your friends and your education, even if you don't want to give her a suggestion in terms of it is now safe for you to make friends, okay? We can make it as simple as that with moon in the 11th, or it is now safe for you to relax and forget a little bit about the busy day, right? With that moon close to the 12th, but keep it, if it's more simpler, keep it to wherever that moon is. You know, it is now safe for you to develop your relationship with God, spirit, religion. I'm combining here that Sagittarius with a 12. Then simply just tell me, right? You can do this with yourself, right? If you don't want to, if you're like afraid of, you know, making a judgment, tell me about your friends. Tell me about your education. Tell me about your relationship with the religion. You would be surprised, right? We know this was all relevant for Oprah, and it still is. And yet with her sun in the individuation-oriented Aquarius in the 2nd, right, of wealth, she is meant to be an innovative leader in wealth building and philanthropic contribution. Where did I get philanthropic? Well, it's one of the key words for Aquarius. Okay? And also creating experiences that she individuates from her family. Okay? In fact, from her mother, right? With sun in Aquarius. And again, we don't need to make a judgment. We don't even need to be wondering what, you know, how did that may play it out in her life. You just need to translate that, and then the client will let you know whether that's relevant or not. Here is John Lennon with his moon in Aquarius in the 11th. He commented about his family and his rebellious nature, right? That's one of the archetypes that we connect with Aquarius. Part of me would like to be accepted by all facets of society, like that's the Aquarian paradox, right? And not to be this loud-mouthed lunatic poet musician. Now, by the way, that's not all Aquarius. This is also, he's got Aries rising, and he also has South Node in Aquarius. I think I'll have another slide where you'll be able to see the South Node. It's actually not shown in this chart. But I cannot be what I'm not. That's very, both Aries and Moon in Aquarius. I did my best to disrupt every friend's home, right? This is a disruption change principle, 11th of friends. Now, you wouldn't necessarily say this to people, right? Like you would say, okay, it is now safe for you to, somewhat like for Oprah, like make friends. And then maybe he would like, oh, right? But I also had some famous breakups with my friends. And that also would, yes, it is now safe for you. It is now safe for you to break up a band, for example, which, right? And because why? He has Aries rising. And so that was also part of the plan. He was eventually, right? He had to build a solo career as well. Anyway, there's a whole lot more here. I'm not going to change the way I look or the way I feel to conform to anything. Conform, non-conformist, right? I've always been a freak. So I've been a freak all my life, and I have to live with that. You know, I'm one of those people. But he does refer to himself as people. So that's good, I would say, for Moon in Aquarius, okay? If you have taken my intermediate astrology for integrated healing work, you already have seen this. We've gone a little bit more in terms of focusing on how to do this and integrate this with the healing modality. But even if you just use journaling and guidelines here that I provided, you can do this. Okay, so you can read up a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because it's a little bit more advanced. But if you are, as several of you, many of you may be already intermediate, if you've studied or used astrology before, here are some recommendation as to what you can do next and work with the sun and the moon. And then if you're ready, right, if you have an understanding of sun and moon, to also look at the energetic partnership. So I also have a template for that. Okay, I'm cultivating the new skills and experiences connected with my sun sign so that I can feel and heal more of my wildish self, right? Or strong feminine with moon in Aries. That would be for Angelina. And she's cultivating her communication skills. Oh, I do have that actually here. Her example. I've got here, yeah, so while healing more of my wild woman, warrior, right, courageous feminine, I'm cultivating, because you see, why would she need it? I mean, we can now go into the why would soul choose this? Well, see, she was here to help women. So it would actually make sense there would be focus on. And not just, any woman, right, any women, but really women that have endured a lot, right, whether they either have been raped or lived through refugee, right, lived in third world countries where there was just some of those, major turmoil, to say the least, happened, wars and so on and so forth. So you can see why would she needed to connect with the courageous and brave woman within so that she could actually be of service to other women who are also meant to be brave, right, and courageous, because they are survivors, if not warriors. So, but then you can also see if we only stay on that moon in Aries level, we could potentially be in that shadowy survival, right? Risk, anxiety mode, rather more like risk creating, right? Which is why it's important, right? The sun in Gemini, you gotta keep talking, keep sharing, keep writing, Angelina. You see why it's important? Kind of helps us to not get stuck in the lunar shadow and also not get stuck in the overdoing of our solar principle. I'm increasing my vitality and energy daily, right? I'm excited to experience more of while taking care of myself. Actually, did not mention here. So you're at this point, you're already gonna, by the time you get to this template, you're already gonna know, right? Whether it's the sun or the moon here, then you are filling in here in the gaps or the blanks, okay? And then some guidelines for when you're actually doing integration, especially paying attention to breath and the body, emotions and or spirit, okay? And the important key here is that this very much, yes, can be based on where you have the sun and the moon. Meaning those are important elements for you to work with, right? The sun and the moon element are important. We'll talk next time about the ascendant. And here is a very simplified way that you can also do this, the sun and the moon integration work. Okay, so you've seen this in my healing class, one of the recent ones. And here's actually an example from my own. I didn't include my chart here because I wanted to I will actually likely include it in one of the next videos because I know it can be helpful, but I actually wanted to simplify it here. So in this particular way, just looking at my Taurus sun in the 8th, and because it's at the very end of the 8th, like literally within a degree of the cusp of the 9th. So then I include both the 8th and the 9th. My moon is in the 5th in Aquarius, and then how I play with this and work with this to literally as a process of integration and healing and self-communion and communion with these principles. There's just so much, I get so much out of this, and I hope that it serves you as well. So either journaling and even including a healing modality, whether it's Reiki or something else that you that feels supportive to you. Okay. Now, I'm not going to spend here more time, but I do have a couple here just reminders also on what I mentioned, right? that the sun and the moon are the primordial parents, but they also reflect the principles that we tend to experience. I don't necessarily say attract, because I don't know that that's the right word, and the principle, because do parents attract, do kids attract parents? Well, we can get into the soul contract theory, or what do we know about reincarnation. So, but I think it's a little tricky area to go there with that. I think it's a more complex than that. So I'm going to say that we tend to relate to, right? We tend to be more sensitive to that particular sun, and for, let's say, sun in Aries, right? We're more sensitive to that Aries, to that more strong, and, or even we could even say we need to see that in our solar parent, right? So you can say masculine parent, you can say father, and maybe that will apply, but I'm going to say solar parent, because as we've said, both mom and dad can play that on some level, or really play that out for you. And so it's a little bit different in the modern astrology, where the astrologers will place mother with the 4th and father with the 10th. I actually do subscribe, and I found it to be very accurate. Gives more precision to place mother in the 10th. Yes, actual biological mother, as well as the archetypal image that you carry within, along with the moon. So the moon, and for the mother, and then also the 10th house cusp. And then the sun for the father, as well as the 4th house cusp. But it is true that both houses will give you indication of some of the, because again, I want you to keep in mind the principles, right? So don't get too stuck on the mother and the father. That's why I've got here the capital, because it's primarily the archetypal image first. That's where the ultimate healing, well, I don't want to say that's the only, sometimes the ultimate healing can be actually healing the actual relationship with the biological parent. But in case you're wondering where to start, if you have planets in the 4th or the 10th, start there, because there could be unfinished work, okay, especially past or even close to midlife, okay? And there's a little bit more for you there to read. A little bit more here on how Angelina views her mother. Just to kind of give you, we talked about her own wildish self, which is really closest to maybe how she would describe herself. But it's what to me is interesting, how she also will say, I will never be as good a mother as she was. And then she has this moon, Jupiter here, moon in Aries. And Aries is the first sign, the best, the champion. So the mother is the best, but also she, likely, if you were to ask her, she would say she also wants to be the best mother. So see how it can work both ways, because she needed to really believe that she could be a great mother as well. And then she's also born with a Cancer rising. There you go. Okay. 4th house is an important, also gives us indication, not just of the father, archetypal father, but also the, I want to say the most significant, because the 4th is also that certain ancestral and parental inheritance that, by the way, can be both mother and biological mother and father and grandfather, like certain important layers, if you like, different myths, family myths that you're actually healing. Now, we've gone a little bit more in this, which we're not going to do for this course, but I was guided that it would be important for you to at least have some understanding of this, because beyond this class number 1, when we talk about it a little bit more from a wholeness perspective, we will be diving more into the business, the marketing, and sometimes coming back to the 4th and the 10th, right? But 10th, especially from a business perspective, but it's not all business in the 10th, right? Important to know. There are some important dilemmas here that we can have in 10th is also part of that axis. So, by the way, I've got here some suggested reading. If you're interested to learn more about this, Liz Green and Howard Sasportas, especially Liz Green, all her books, I would suggest one of my probably top 2 astrologers that I read is Stephen Forrest and Liz Green. So from her luminaries, I believe it's called Inner Planets, pretty much all her books, the development of personality and so on and so forth. Okay, highly recommend. a little bit more on the Sun Father medicine, just really more specific phrasing you can work with, even questions to really help you distinguish the difference between the Sun and the Moon, right? Okay, here is the Moon and the Mother medicine. Again, keeping in mind this is the Mother with the capital M, but it can be also the biological, because in some cases it could be the grandmother, right? Again, whoever was, that's why I emphasize the lunar principle, whoever could be a grandmother, it could be in some cases aunt, right? That play that role. So a little bit here on just how His Holiness Dalai Lama, how he experienced his family, what I thought was interesting. You know, he describes his father as being, he said, I remember pulling his mustache and being hit hard for my trouble, right? He's got Mars in the 4th. But then he also says he was a kind man too, and he never bore grudges. Mars in strategic and peaceful Libra. See how that works? And this is actually part of his design. Like, this is his Mars, how he takes action, right? He's a warrior, you could say a fighter for peace. Dalai Lama is, right? So, see what I mean? And then Albert Einstein, when he says, if I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician. And then you look at his chart and you're like, we're one of the geniuses, right, in the human history and science and, right, thought leaders, Sun in Pisces. Like, I know I was surprised, but then not really, right? Because some of the things and how he, right, mentions and talks, refers to intuition and imagination. You can see how he values that. He also has Pisces on the 10th. And he also describes his mother, right, that she was a talented and dedicated piano player. And she made Albert begin with violin lessons at the age of 5. So very strong mother, representing the solar principle, but yet musical, right, with Sun in Pisces. Okay, and a whole lot more. You can read up on that here. Winfrey, a little bit, Oprah, obviously, show Winfrey as a child. She says, you know, her grandmother would hit her with a stick when she did not do her chores or if she misbehaved. But she also taught her to read before the age of 3, right? And then she has Moon in Sagittarius. Obviously, she was basically with her maternal grandmother. So her grandmother actually played that role. Okay. And then also she was born to an unmarried teenager mother. And it's interesting, she has that Libra, which is the archetype of commitment and relationship and marriage, right on her midheaven, which I know contributed to her being very popular and able to connect with huge audiences around the world. But it's interesting that that's something that's obviously highlighted here. Like the marriage principle, right, in relationship to that mother archetype, basically. And yet Oprah, right, hasn't married. So anyway, I'll just leave that there. And then Obama, remember his mother dying of ovarian cancer. He's got that 28 Scorpio, but by the way, right, this doesn't mean that this would mean that in all cases, but it's interesting. This is why I highlighted here. She wasn't thinking about coming to terms with her own mortality. You see, he's talking about mortality, which is very much Scorpio principle. This is actually what he's learned through her example. She had been diagnosed just as she was transitioning between jobs, like another Scorpio principle here on the 10th, right? And then Moon in Gemini, which is also here, right, suggest healing that archetype, that relationship with father or father image. You can see how both would be very, very relevant. And you would be like, but Milada, really, why would that really be relevant? Because for all we know, maybe he was okay, right? Well, we would have to read his books, right, and to get more information. But you know, we know that birtherism conspiracy and citizenship conspiracy, you know, it may have shaken him up for all we know, right? That he may have reminded him that he needed to reconnect with his roots for all we know, right? Like, we don't know everything. And I think it's interesting to hear him say the strongest weapon against hateful speech is not to repression, it is more speech. And he has Moon in Gemini, Moon as the inner healer. And Obama formed an image of his absent father from stories told by his mother. Fourth house is the father, right? The father's image. Gemini is the stories, and Moon is the, so mother, right? Played the mother principle in the father's house, you could say, in a Gemini type of strategy through stories. And then more that very, very much confirms, right, the astrology, what we're talking about, including John Lennon's growing up here, a little bit more about his experience and how he describes his parents, if you're interested. You know, the song that he wrote, one of the, you know, many songs that he wrote, Mother, You Had Me, But I Never Had You, right, Moon in Aquarius. And then look at that Cancer here on the 4th. And then he, in his song, he'll say, Daddy, come home. Mama, don't go. Daddy, come home. Right? He's got Cancer on the 4th. Literally, like the father image is connected in his psyche, connected with the archetype, connected with home and safety. Daddy, come home. Okay, so now you tell me that, right, the mother is represented by the 4th. Maybe, I mean, partially it is, but I really do place father in the 4th and mother. And I do suggest for you to try that out, at least for the next few months, if not a year, and definitely for the duration of the course, and see how that works for you. And then I've got more slides for you here that you can work with, more specifically placing the sun in through different signs and houses, including the moon. Okay, so it kind of makes it easier, but you can also work with those original, right? Just knowing these different concepts of the sun and the moon and what they represent, right? Using all those, the original slides as well, that are just very different archetypes that apply to everything, right? Wherever you work with that particular archetype. So core creativity, and then your essential nurture needs by moon. I know these have been very, very helpful for students. Evolutionary choice by the sun, just because I want to really remind you that with the sun, we're looking to increase here, right? Our effort, our input, you know, we're providing, I don't know if that's always the best word, but we are meant to radiate that energy, to hold that frequency, but really to radiate it, right? To give it to offer it to the world. Compared to the moon, we're more healing that aspect of us. You know, when we talk about self-love, well, the moon has a lot to do with that, okay? And the sun, but more confidently. The moon is more of when we say healing it, right? And then the sun is radiating that confidence, right? More like a leadership, okay? And then just a little bit more here in a recap on the sun and the moon combining, and here for Dalai Lama, right? So when he talks about warm-heartedness being a key factor for healthy individuals, he knows, it's like he speaks to me his astrology, right? Sun in Cancer. He says, this is, I need to, this, you know, he calls it warm-heartedness. I don't know if I would have used that word if I, you know, oftentimes people that have these energies in their chart will like create amazing, and you have likely done that. It's like, oh my goodness, that is just amazing descriptor of that state of being. And then the moon, Neptune in Virgo, which is the soul of a modest one. It's like the humility, really. You could say both Virgo and then also Neptune softening that in the 3rd of mind. This is that desire to really heal mind. And if you read his stuff, if you see what he's creating, what he talks about, importance of healing the mind, right? Of especially younger people, disciplining the mind. This is exactly what he talks about. For John Lennon, healing the collective feminine, right? With the moon in Aquarius once again. And then his sun in Libra. But he ultimately knows he's here to create, you could say, a path to peace, or even be that peaceful person, right? With that sun in the 6th, close to the 7th. All we're saying is give peace a chance. one song at a time, right? Create experiences for peace and harmony. And here is now just different slides, just a little bit more information, because I know sometimes we like to see less on the slide, sometimes a little bit more. Here is the slide with that past life oriented south node here as well, which is why his, that rebellious and passionate and wild nature wasn't just the Aries, by the way, rising. It really was also the south node in Aries. And you can see how that's the sun, the north node, and Mars in Libra are here significant. And yet how that Mars in Libra in Dalai Lama's life and John Lennon's, there are similarities, right? But yet different. Tony Robbins, integrating sun, that again, would you know ever that Tony, would you say ever that Tony Robbins, if you didn't know, right? If you didn't know his chart, it was sun in Pisces, right? Choosing compassion, right? I oftentimes mention, right, that little credibility crisis that he had, right, in that last year's conference with the a woman that asked him about, right, his perspective on the Me Too movement. So imagine that he actually remembered his sun in Pisces, and that he remembered his Aries, rather not Aries, but a Libra rising, because he is already instinctually, we're all operating from our lunar perspective. We don't need to learn that. If anything, we just need to be more at peace with that and heal it. What we do need to consciously work more from a more active perspective, you could say, and deliberate, is the sun and the rising sign. We'll talk more about the rising next time. And at this point, if you'd like to locate, you want to get at this point a sense, if you do not already know where to locate the ascendant in the chart, and to know also, which obviously is right here, where it says AC, and then this is where the first house starts, that you already know now that this will be the second house cusp, right? It starts the second house, and so on and so forth, okay? Just a little bit of a recap here. And then at the bottom of the chart, you also will see, in case you're not sure exactly what sign that is here, because sometimes it's at the end of the sign, at the bottom of the aspectarian on the left-hand side, the AC here and the MC will tell you actually here, if you know your symbols, right? The degree and the symbol, really the sign of the ascendant, for example, and then the second house cusp. And if you're not sure, again, this is more relevant if you're, sometimes if the cusp is at the very end or beginning maybe of the sign, okay? And at this point, I just have some summary sheets for you. We've talked about this before. I talk more about this in introductory courses, and you're likely already familiar with the primary triad. I refer to them as authenticity keys, the sun, moon, and the ascendant, right? So I'm growing to become more with the heart, soul of, right, which is your moon, growing to become more, which is your sun sign, and who needs to show up more as your ascendant. But I've offered you a whole lot more there, phrasing, right, that you can work with to really grow in a deeper understanding of the sun and the moon. Of course, you can work with a simpler version of the triad formula as well, if you like. And here is Angelina's example using that. And then I've got some slides here, more of a summary for you to read upon the elements, right? Fire and air, more self-expressive, earth and water, more contained, more grounded, more even repressive or inwardly oriented. A little bit more on the elements here and some keywords. These are typically these slides that I have in my beginning astrology summaries or intermediate astrology summaries, but we already talked about this. And rather 3 modes and qualities that not super essential for you to know, but I just kind of here to refer to that. It kind of helps to understand a little bit more about Aries when you know that it's a cardinal fire sign. So that cardinal element adds to it. Fixed element adds to Taurus, right? Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, and immutable Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. What the sign archetypes are. So you can kind of just really describe it or get a sense of it a little bit more. The houses as well. And just little different ways that we have different house divisions. Again, not essential for you, but you can read up on it just to kind of get a sense of why the first house is important, right? And the 10th, for example, as well, more action-oriented. A little bit on the personal and social planets and what they are, and the so-called transcendental planets. We will apply this a little bit more specifically to business and marketing throughout the course, but here is your summary that you can refer to later on. And then a rule that I'm going to touch more on. I typically talk more about this in more precision-oriented classes, but it is important. I will be highlighting this. Just a number one key rule here is to keep in mind that I'm finding even a lot of intermediate astrologers are not always aware of or even utilizing that the planet that rules the house is the planet that rules the sign on the house cusp, right? Planets in the houses are secondary, meaning if Dalai Lama has Cancer rising or Angelina Jolie, they have Cancer rising moon, is the important as the ruler of the first, just as then the sun as the ruler of their Leo in the second house for Dalai Lama, right? Do they both? I think they both have. Leo, right, would be important for when we're talking about their second house. And then a little bit about why Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn as the rulers, right? Because they're so much more massive than Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. And you can see that visual here. A little bit of a summary, just again, second house cusp, third house cusp, right? Here, sixth house cusp, and then ruled by Jupiter, right? So it's important here. The ruler of Dalai Lama's third house is actually the sun. So yes, Venus, Moon, and Neptune are here. But for example, if you want to get a sense of what books he's going to be writing or marketing that's going to align, and we're going to learn that, it's going to be important to actually see that third house cusp is in Leo. Anyway, I'm going to teach you that if you're not already familiar with that, just a different way that the rulers of each sign are shown in a table. And another image, in case you're more visual, right? The rulers, don't worry too much about the rulers if that's a little too much information at this point, but that you can get back to this if it comes up and you are interested throughout the course to learn more, then you can get back to it here. And then some keywords on all of the planets, in which we're not all going to get into them because I really want to apply this more in a functional way, so you're not like memorizing this, but it actually makes some functional, practical sense in that you know where you can apply this and why would Uranus be important, and what context, when would Sun be important. Okay, so we'll discuss that later on, but here are some keywords for all of the planets, some questions, and even some keywords to keep in mind based on where these planets are in your chart. And that brings us to the end of today's summary, or really introduction to your course, and then also including Astrology of Wholeness 101 perspective. Okay, so your quiz and reflection questions for today would be, what are the 3 core wants of your sun sign? What are 3 nurturing needs of your moon sign? And then a couple of reflection questions on what aspect of the sun or moon feels unfamiliar, distant, or unknown, and then maybe focus on that a little bit, using some of the templates that I shared today. Or what aspect of your sun or moon feels very familiar? Okay, and maybe you want to actually get more familiar with it, in case you're wondering, where do I start, sun or the moon? And then a couple of journaling prompts as well, if you're interested. Using the sun and the moon as well. I'm increasing my vitality and energy daily by, I'm excited to experience more of, I'm growing to become a, so that I can create more of, right? And then your homework with that will be to choose and work on one of the templates for your sun and moon and or the sun and moon integrated discovery, and then journal on any of the new insights you gain. So especially something that obviously is calling you that it's new. And with that, see you next time for your video class number 2 on amplifying your highly magnetic signature style. We're going to get more business talk like and social media presence. Okay, so with that said, hope that this was helpful. Thank you for participating, for listening, and hope this inspires you to do some either sun moon integration work or at least start journaling on your lunar needs and the solar wants. And then for you, there may be lunar wants as well, depending on, if you have moon in Aries or moon in Leo, that can feel a little bit different than moon in Cancer, right? Or vice versa. So with that said, huge hugs. Looking forward to connecting with you again very soon. And bye for now.